Welcome to the Movement Nerd Hangout that was supposed to be for January, but I screwed up my schedule and pushed it into February. So this is our February Movement Nerd Hangout, and we're doing part 2 of core training from the inside out. If you haven't done part 1 yet, that's okay. We're going to be reviewing it very briefly, and it shouldn't be any sort of limitation for your understanding of today's. So what are we going to talk about today? We'll be reviewing the pillars 1 and 2 that we covered in the first part, as I just let some people in, interrupting my sentence. So we'll be reviewing pillars 1 and 2. And pillars 1 and 2 were, if you did part 1, were access to three-dimensional spinal mobility and diaphragmatic breathing. And a couple of new people just popped in that I have to say hello to. Hi, Owen. And hi, Santiago. Thanks for coming. Hopefully, hey, Owen, I just want to say hi. Thanks for coming. And thank you for interrupting my sentence. So without further ado, we'll review those first 2 pillars. And then those will be a nice segue into pillars 3 and 4, which will be creating intra-abdominal pressure and integration with the movement of the whole body with the limbs and with spinal motion. What the heck happens to your abs when you try to move your spine around? For example, if you're doing yoga, how do you engage your core doing yoga? How do you breathe and engage your core? So those are the kind of questions that we'll be exploring with movement today. And the reason why I call this from the inside out is because for a lot of us, our first introduction to doing core exercises was with the big sexy things like planks and heavy ass deadlifts and things that require a prerequisite of the basics, a basics that we probably never really took the time to appreciate and work on. And that was certainly my story, just in a nutshell. My first thing I ever did with my core was crunches. And I had a ton of back injuries. And then I thought that, well, to help my back, I should just get stronger. And the way to get stronger is to power lift. So I'm going to do a bunch of heavy deadlifts and squats and planks. And that's going to be my core strengthening. However, I didn't actually go back and build on these fundamentals, which are my 4 pillars: the spinal mobility, diaphragmatic breathing, intra-abdominal pressure, and integration with the whole body. So that's my spiel on basics. As one of my mentors told me, we never rise to the level of our expectations. We can only fall to the level of our training, and our training is those basics, are those basics. So let's review. I don't really want to talk and do the review. I'd like to do a movement review of part 1. So we're just going to get right into the movement component. Then we'll come back. I'll give you a little lecture on the new stuff, the intra-abdominal pressure, and then we'll do a little movement exploration of that. And then if there's time at the end, we'll do some questions. Cool. So let's stand up. And those of you who have done my sessions before, you'll know how we always start this thing is with a little check-in with our body to see where we're at. Where's our point A for today? So we can tell if what we did in the session was actually beneficial. And by beneficial, we're going to work with the idea of feeling a bit more centered in our bodies, feeling a bit more comfortable, a bit more free. So stand with your feet side by side. We'll just take a moment for you to feel where you're sensing the pressure of your feet on the floor. Do you have more weight in your right foot or your left foot right now? If this is your first time doing this, and you're not really quite sure where you're feeling your feet, that's okay. Not knowing is really good information. Do you feel more weight in the fronts of your feet or in the backs of your feet? More weight on the insides or the outsides of your feet? And with the understanding that in a perfect human being, which none of us are, we would have equal weight on the right foot, equal weight on the left foot, equal weight on the fronts and back, inside, outside, maybe right in the middle of our 2 feet. However, we're probably not. And if you feel like you are, you're probably not. But do your best. Just see as if you're looking down at your feet from above. Where would the most pressure in your feet be if you were to draw it in and shade in those areas? Don't try to hold your feet in a certain way. Let yourself rest into the bones of your feet. Where do you end up? And this is our start point for today. Here's where you are. And now, because we're talking about our core, and one of the main structures that make up our core is our spine, I'd like you to try to see in your mind's eye how your spine is holding itself right now. What is the resting position of your spine? You can close your eyes if that helps you, if that feels okay to do. And try to see that lumbar curve, your lower back. How curved is it right now? Does it feel like you're sinking into it, like your spine and belly are pushing forwards? Or do you feel like your tailbone is tucked under and your back is rounded? And if you move up into your upper spine, what's that like? What's the shape of your upper spine? Without trying to shape it, what do you perceive is its resting position? Is your upper back really rounded? Do you feel like your rib cage is leaning behind your pelvis? What is the shape of your spine like? Is there any discomfort anywhere just standing here? We've been standing here for a few minutes now, and usually this is enough for people to start to feel any pressure points from the force of gravity. Does your lower back start to ache? Do you feel like gravity is really heavy, it's weighing you down? What sort of things do you notice standing here about your spine? Do you feel like you're twisted in one direction? Whatever comes up for you, no right or wrong answers. We're just trying to establish a point A. Now, let's do a couple of movements. Put your feet side by side, knees straight, and we'll just do a very basic forwards bend. Knees straight, reach down like you're trying to touch the floor, and oh my gosh, wow. I'm a little stiff. How does this feel generally? Can you let your head drop? Do you feel tension in your back, tension in your neck, tension in your legs? Where are you feeling this today? And we're using this as an assessment of how easily your spine can bend, but you might notice the sensation shows up in your legs or in your neck. Now we'll do the opposite motion, which is a back bending movement. So if you have any issues with your lower back or your neck, be very gentle with this. Bring your arms up and gently lean backwards into a back bend until you reach a natural stop. And I want you to gauge how comfortable is this for you. Don't stay there for too long because it doesn't feel very good. As you lean back, is there compression in your lower back? Tension in your neck? Does it feel like your whole spine bends, or is it just your lower back that thrusts forwards? How is the articulation of your whole spine there? Do you get a stretch in your abs? Whatever information comes up. And we'll just use those two movements as an initial checkpoint. All right. So our first pillar that we covered in part 1, we're going to review very quickly, is our diaphragmatic breathing pattern. I'm not going to get too much into the conceptual side of why this is useful and important. Hopefully it'll become self-explanatory as we do the session. And you can always go back to part 1 and listen to that whole speech I did about it if you want to listen to me talk. So lie on your back. If you want to have your feet elevated on a chair or a couch, you can do that if it helps your lower back to relax. Put your feet flat on the floor. And we'll just check in with the 5 quadrants of the diaphragmatic breath. So the first quadrant here is if you put one hand on your lower abdomen, one hand on your chest, your sternum bone. Take a breath in. Both of your hands should move with the breath up to the ceiling. Was that happening, or was that unnatural? Was it just your chest moving, just your belly moving? In a healthy diaphragmatic breath, you'd like to see both those areas expanding upwards to the ceiling evenly, not just belly breathing, overstretching the abdominals, not just your chest. So how well is that happening for you? That's our check number 1. And just move along when you're ready. Number 2 is if you find your 2 pelvis bones, these 2 sticky outy things at the front, and go a little bit underneath there into your lower abdomen and just gently press in with your fingertips. Don't hurt yourself, just a gentle poke. As you breathe in, do you feel that quadrant expanding up to the ceiling? Take 1 or 2 breaths to check in if you are doing that naturally. Does your lower abdomen expand? So this is lower in the pelvis than before. Do you have to force it, or does it naturally happen right from the beginning of your breath? And that fills out the anterior, the front of the body expansion we're looking for. In the diaphragmatic breath, we're looking for a 360 expansion, like a balloon blowing up or an umbrella opening all the way around. So let's go into the side of that 360-degree experience. So put your hands on your lower rib cage, on the sides. Take a breath in. And do you feel those lower ribs expanding outwards and upwards towards your ears as you breathe in? A lateral expansion of the rib cage. Do you feel that? And is it even on both sides? If you're me, you know, I say this almost every time I do this in my classes, my left side doesn't move. And that might indicate which muscles are not accessible. So if we go into the review of Gary Ward's rules of motion, joints act, muscles react, muscles lengthen before they contract. If my left side of my rib cage isn't expanding, what do you think is happening with all those muscles on my left side? If they can't move in response to my breath, I probably have a little bit harder a time contracting those muscles as well, which is true for me for sure. Now, lastly, let's feel out whether when you breathe in, the back of your body feels like it expands into the floor. This one you don't need your hands to feel. Just get the sense when you breathe in, is there the feeling like the back of your rib cage does a little bit of an expansion into the ground? So now we have all of those quadrants filled out: sternum and belly, lower pelvis, abdomen, lateral rib cage, and back side of the body. And I'd like you to choose 1 or 2 quadrants that were the hardest for you and pay attention to those. And we'll just do a rhythmic breathing pattern for the next minute, just really quickly, to see how it feels if you can fill out that 360-degree pattern deliberately. So put your hands in the area that you need it most. So I'm going to go onto the sides of my rib cage because that's the hardest one for me. And when you breathe in, try to breathe in maybe 3 or 4 seconds, elongating the breath a little bit. And I want you to exhale for a little bit longer than you were before. Complete exhalations. Little pause at the end of your exhalation and then breathe in again and just really focus in on that expansion into the areas where you need it the most. Don't fall asleep on me. This can be relaxing somewhat. For some people, it can be not relaxing and actually produce a bit of anxiety. So if that's you and slow conscious breathing makes you feel a bit anxious, then breathe faster. Just focusing in on that 360 expansion. And if you feel like as you're doing this, you're getting a really good handle on, for me, my bucket handles, which is the code name for the lateral ribcage expansion. They're like bucket handles. If you're getting a good handle on your problem areas, move to another spot. See if you can focus on all of those quadrants simultaneously. And just for the last couple breaths, feel how as you're expanding all the way around evenly, you're giving an equal opportunity for all the muscles of that attached around the abdomen to expand and then contract. When you breathe in, all the tissues expand and load eccentrically, giving them the stimulation to then contract, albeit very gently. We're at rest here. We haven't added any intensity yet, which is coming up today. So finish up your last exhalation. And then we'll move into our second pillar, which is the access to 3D spinal mobility. This is where the concept of joints act, muscles react really comes to life. We have 33 joints in the spine. Most of us don't move evenly through those 33 joints. To access all of the musculature of the abdomen, we also need to access all the articulation potential of the spine, because that's the expanse of joints that the muscles of the abdomen cross. So how well we can move our spine dictates a lot of how well we can actually access these muscles. So before we go and try to strengthen our abdominals, we want to make sure that the structures that those muscles cross can actually move well, which will mean that we don't really need to think about our abs too much, which is always nice to have to think about one less thing. So we're going to go into our supine cogs exercise, which if you've done my liberated body workshop, or if you do anatomy and motion things, you already know what a cog is. And we're going to focus on primarily just getting all of the joints in our spine to move evenly, not just one spot that you're already good at moving. You might get the feeling of your abs lengthening and then contracting, and then the muscles on your back lengthening and then contracting. And that's what we're after. All right, so on your backs again, please. And we're going to begin with a pelvis anterior tilt. An anterior tilt of the pelvis. You want to visualize the two bones at the front of your pelvis rolling closer to your thighs. So it's like your pelvis is a boulder rolling down towards your feet. More of the pressure is going to be rolling onto your tailbone, to the bottom of your pelvis. What that will do is lift your lower back and your upper back away from the floor into an extension. So here we are extending your spine, which is going to stretch open all of the front of your body. So now the abdominal muscles are getting a gentle lengthening experience. All the muscles on the back of your body are going to be contracting. What you want to have happen with your head here is your chin tucking slightly towards your chest and the back of your neck moving down towards the floor. Let's go into the other direction. So begin by rolling with your pelvis, tucking it under without squeezing your legs or your butt. So you're rolling with the pelvis, not doing a hip bridge, lifting your butt off the floor, just a roll. All the pressure should now be going down into your lower back on the floor. You should feel your upper back beginning to press into the floor and your chin slightly getting nudged up to the ceiling. Now what you should feel here is your rib cage at the front coming down to meet your pelvis at the front. So your abdominal muscles are shortening. All the muscles at the back of your body are lengthening. All the muscles of your spine decompressing, while the front muscles are contracting, tightening up. Now let's go a couple more rounds, going back with your pelvis into that anterior tilt, rolling the boulder down towards your feet. And I want you to feel the wave of motion through your spine. Where does it stop? Is it only happening in your lower back and nothing happening in your upper back? We want it to be as even as possible through your whole spine. So if you're only moving through your lower back, let's see if you can redistribute that motion to come a little bit higher up. Think of your chest bone lifting up to the ceiling, lifting your upper spine away from the floor. And does that give you a little bit more motion, this curving motion like a rainbow into your upper back? Chin should be tucking towards your chest, lengthening the back of your neck. Take one of those 360 breaths here. Breathe into the sides of your rib cage, lower pelvis. A little bit more challenging in this position. And then go the other way, posterior tilt with the pelvis. Tuck it under. Don't squeeze your butt, don't squeeze your legs. Press your lower back towards the floor. I want you to notice at which levels of your spine is it hard to push into the floor. For a lot of folks, getting your lower back to fully press into the floor can be a real challenge. Where is the least amount of pressure for you? That might indicate an area where it's hard to access those abdominal muscles because the spine is not moving. There's some like a brick wall there that you're fighting against. See if you can get the joints to move down into the floor, all the vertebrae pressing downwards. And do you feel a gentle contraction of your abs? Let's do one more round. After you take a breath in and out, full 360 breath. Fill up those quadrants. Last time. Tilt your pelvis the opposite way now. Anterior tilt, creating that rainbow shape with your spine. And see if you can feed movement into the spots where you're a little bit more restricted. For me, that's my upper back for sure. So I'm focusing on peeling my upper spine off the floor a little bit and reducing how much my lower back, where my belly button is lifting off, because I'm way too good at that. I don't need any more extension in that area. And do you feel a little bit of stretch in your abs? Remember, if our muscles must lengthen before they contract, which is one of the rules of motion we're working with here, if we can get our abdominal muscles to experience that lengthening, there's a very good chance we're also going to have an easier time getting them to contract from that most lengthened position. Now let's go back the other way again. Last round, posterior tilt with the pelvis, tucking it under without using the leg muscles. Press your whole back into the ground. Let your chin lift slightly, so there should be space between your neck and the floor and no space between your spine and the floor. Take a breath in and out. Full exhalation, rib cage is moving down towards your pelvis bones. And take a little break after that. Slowly turn to your side. Safest way to get up. If you are someone who has lower back issues, please roll to your side, come up, and back up to your feet at your own pace. So that was our part one in a nutshell. Put your feet back side by side. No expectations for anything to change just yet, but for some people, you might notice, if you check in with where your pressure is in your feet right now, that it feels a little bit more, well, I don't want to impose an expectation on you. How does it feel? Does it feel different? More centered, less centered? What's going on? A lot of folks find that just by doing that simple practice, moving their spine from one end of the spectrum, full extension to full flexion, their body naturally finds a more centered resting point, which is what I like to consider that indirect sort of core training, just having access to both ends of a spectrum, giving the body an experience of being more centered, which has nothing really to do with your abs. Anyway, come back to comfortable position where you can watch me talk for a little while. And maybe if you'd like to just make some notes about what that experience was like for you. If you have any observations, you can feel free to type something into the chat box that I can look at later. Always nice to hear how things are going for you. And I think I need to mute somebody's sound coming in. There we go. All right, so let's get into the new stuff. So that was very gentle and at rest. But we need the at rest component, that automaticity, before we can start to consciously begin to control what our abs are doing, which is what most people start with, is the let's control this thing that we call our abs, with planks and stability and all that stuff. So now we're moving more into the stability side of things. What is intra-abdominal pressure? Intra-abdominal is, in the abdominal cavity, and pressure is, well, pressure, increasing the pressure. So how do we do that, and why is it important? I like to think about intra-abdominal pressure as an airbag. So what is the function of an airbag? It's for protection. It creates this stiffness. So if you got bumped into it, you wouldn't move as far and wouldn't smash your face against the windshield. So if you think about what would an airbag be like to have wrapped around your spine, well, it would create more stiffness in your spine. And this is why you see powerlifters doing the Valsalva maneuver, which is when they take a breath in and hold it and create a lot of pressure in their gut so that their spine stays stiffer. And that's also why they would wear the belt, to create more pressure and more stiffness so that their spine doesn't move as much. Now, there are good times for your spine not to move, and there are not good times for your spine not to move. So we want to have the conscious choice of whether we want to create stiffness and rigidity in the spine, or whether we want to allow for motion in the spine, depending on the activity that we're doing. So what else creates intra-abdominal pressure? Just to give you an analogy, is imagine you just chugged 5 beers and you have a lot of gas in your intestines and a lot of space being taken up. How good would you think it feels to move around after that and do a yoga class after you've just had a bunch of beer? Well, you're not going to be able to move as easily. You wouldn't want to go and do a bunch of toe touches. That would cause a lot of gas to kind of come out. And often if I have clients that are kind of bloated and we're doing core work, they start burping and I'm like, yes, that means we're creating gut pressure. This is good, even though it's uncomfortable. But anyway, I digress. So our intra-abdominal pressure is to create more stiffness by virtue of more air pressure in the abdominal cavity. So this is for protection and support when it's a higher intensity activity. So when you inhale, what we were just doing with that 360 expansion, the reason why that's important for intra-abdominal pressure is, even though you weren't thinking about moving your diaphragm, when you can get that expansion of all those quadrants, what it will do, your diaphragm, which is like this parachute-shaped muscle on the inside of your rib cage, it will go down as you breathe in and press down the organs, and think of that like smooshing them. And when you smoosh something, like if you're holding a balloon in your hands and you press down on it, that increases the pressure in the balloon. You press too hard, the balloon's going to pop because the pressure gets so big. Don't worry, you're not going to pop your guts. But the diaphragm moving down with that inhalation does increase the pressure in the abdominal cavity. Now, what happens if you don't have a nice even 360 expansion? For example, you're only belly breathing. is you have a reduction in the pressure because you're just pushing your abs forwards. So to create good intra-abdominal pressure, we actually need an abdominal contraction all the way around by holding the rib cage from popping open and preventing the abdominals from expanding forwards too much and preventing the spine from extending too much. So really, when we're trying to create that pressure in the abdomen, it really comes down to limiting how much forwards motion of the actual structures are happening, how much the rib cage flares open, how much the spine extends forwards, and how much you're allowing the abdominals to stretch forwards when you breathe in. So it's like a breath that's that diaphragmatic breath, but with like you're wrapped around in cellophane, and there's only so much you can expand, and that will increase the pressure. And that's where the abdominal muscles come into play. So on the exhalation, we have the diaphragm going back up. And on the exhalation, the abdominal muscles will naturally contract. And that makes the abdominal cavity a little bit smaller by virtue of bracing all the way around. So to create that pressure, what we're going to be practicing is doing a full exhalation, which is going to make the abdominal cavity smaller by virtue of that compression all around of the abs. So think of the exhalation as abdominals contracting, letting all the air out of the lungs, wrapping your body around in cellophane, AKA your abs. And then on the inhalation, trying to hold that abdominal contraction to a certain degree by not allowing the rib cage to go open, by not allowing the spine to extend, and by breathing into the quadrants evenly, not just expanding the abdominals forwards. And that will maintain a degree of pressure in the abdomen, which will maintain that degree of stiffness in the spine and the trunk. So if there's any questions about that, save it until the end, after you've done the movement exploration of that, because it'll probably make a lot more sense once you do it, if you've never done anything like this before. So when do we need intra-abdominal pressure? Because it's not always good. It's not always bad either. It's very useful, but there's a context to it. So we need intra-abdominal pressure when we're in a situation in which we need our spine and trunk to be more stiff and more stable and less movement, so that forces can better distribute from upper body and lower body through center efficiently without any leakage. So I'm going to call out a couple of situations, and in your minds, just answer, would that be a situation in which you'd want higher or lower intra-abdominal pressure and stiffness in the trunk? So let's say you're pushing your car uphill. Would you want higher or lower intra-abdominal pressure? Probably you want higher pressure, because if you're pushing your car uphill and your spine was floppy, that's not very good for force production and not very good for protecting your spine from over moving in one area, creating stress on that area. What about doing yin yoga? Would you want high abdominal pressure doing yin yoga? Probably not. Although I used to do that, I had a lot of back problems. My spine was very arched. So when I was lying on my back in Shavasana, which is the corpse pose, my spine was really high off the floor and there was a lot of compression. So just to feel comfortable in my Shavasana, I actually had to brace my abdominals and press my back into the floor. So I was lying there in the relaxation pose with a lot of intention to create pressure in my abdomen, just to keep my spine from feeling like it was overextending. So not very useful, but for me, that's the only way I could get through it. So take that however you want. Now, what about doing a deadlift, lifting 200 pounds off the floor? High pressure or low pressure? High stiffness, low stiffness, higher? Thanks, Owen, for answering all these questions in the chat. Love it. You're right. What about walking for the bus? High or low intra-abdominal pressure? Probably more to the lower side. You don't want none because you don't want your spine just to be flopping around like it's blowing in the breeze, but you definitely don't want to have to walk like you're bracing yourself for getting hit or falling over. But if you're somebody who does have a degree of pain or discomfort in your body, you might be bracing more walking to create that protection for yourself, which is just what it is right now. And one more thing, how about doing a back handspring? That one's a bit of an outlier. What do you think? Back handspring, high abdominal pressure or low? And the tricky thing about that is doing a back handspring, you have to go into a back bend, which requires a lot of motion. And when your spine is moving like that, it's much harder to create that container of stiffness. But at the same time, you need a lot of strength to do that. So it's a little bit of both. This is where the integration part comes in, which is my kind of fourth pillar, is even though you're doing a back bend, or like we did on the floor just earlier, that extension where you're arching your back off the floor, we still want to have a degree of ability to breathe into that 360 pattern. We still want to have some capacity to generate a bit of intra-abdominal pressure, even though it's going to be a lot less. So we don't want to let it go completely, but it's going to be reduced for sure. And that's why gymnasts and dancers and those of us who need a lot, big ranges of motion, circus performers, we tend to get into a bit of trouble because we need to be strong and flexible. And sometimes those things aren't always conducive, and it leads to people like me having to stop dancing at the ripe old age of 22 because your back's had too many injuries. But I was a lot less intelligent back then. So having the ability to generate intra-abdominal pressure while doing a back handspring to a certain degree or back bending probably is going to be useful, but knowing it's not going to be as possible as if you're just in a neutral spine position. So the farther away from neutral you go, the less potential for that pressure build is going to be possible. However, you can still try, and it feels pretty interesting to try. So I think I already answered this question, but how to generate intra-abdominal pressure? We're going to be going through that in an exercise in a few secs, but it's about maintaining the rib cage positioning, not letting it pop open, not letting your abdominals and that anterior quadrant, the front quadrant, not letting that expansion dominate the show. So we want better emphasis on the side expansion and the lower abdomen and the back of the body expansion so that the front of the body doesn't just go all of the movement there. We want to limit how much the spine and ribcage are moving when you breathe and holding a bit of an abdominal contraction to create a smaller container. Wrap yourself in cellophane with your abs. Now, when we get into challenges is when we're in situations that require us to be stable, but like the back bend, we're compromised, or if the demand for respiration increases. So if you're getting really, really fatigued and you're having to take deeper breaths and you're having to expand your rib cage more and more to get those deeper breaths and you're getting tired, it's a lot harder to maintain that pressure. So imagine you just ran a marathon and you're fatigued, and then you go and try to do some heavy lifting. Not that anyone would do that unless you're in CrossFit, not dissing CrossFit or anything, but it's really challenging when you're fatigued and you're breathing a lot and you're having to expand a lot to breathe, but that totally counteracts the requirement to hold that container smaller with your abdominals. So that's when we get into trouble, when there's a high respiratory demand and a high stability demand. That's a really challenging situation to manage, which is why we do core training, I guess, and why we do cardiovascular training. So we have those two demands covered. And I think that's all I really have to say about that. I think that's what Forrest Gump said, didn't he? That's all I have to say about that. Let's do some exercise. Not really exercise, it's not going to be a heavy core workout, but we're going to go through a couple of exercises with those concepts in mind that will build on what we just did on the floor there. Yes, Bonnie, questions afterwards. But this is stuff that you know. You do this with me in class every week. All right, guys, let's come up to your feet. And just as I said, come up to your feet. We're actually going to go down to the floor. So for our check-in for this, we are going to do what we did in part 1 was a plank check-in. So plank, we need lots of stability, straight line with the body, no movement in the spine. And we're going to check in to see how well you can do that 360 quadrant breathing pattern in a stable environment, such as a plank. So let's do it. I'm not going to coach the plank too much because it's not Strength Training Tuesday, which is when I do my strength training classes online. Anyway, I had so much coffee today, I'm rambling. In your plank position, hands under shoulders, make sure your spine isn't arched like this. You're going to try to press your lower back to the ceiling, tuck your pelvis under, head is in line with the rest of your body, not down to the floor. And I want you to hold this and just take some breaths. See how well you can do that 360 quadrant breathing pattern. Do you have any challenges with this? Can you still breathe into the sides of your rib cage? Can you still breathe into both your chest and your belly? Or do you feel that you're only breathing into your belly and slowly your spine's getting pulled into an arch? Can you breathe into the back of your rib cage? How easy does this feel? How stable do you feel? And when you're done, a couple of breaths, just take a little break there. I'm aware of this beam of light slowly encroaching on me, and I hope that we finish before it gets all the way to me. Anyway, now there is one test that there's this movement screen called the functional movement screen. They do a test called the trunk stability push-up test, and you don't need to do this if you know already that it's going to be a challenge, but this is their measure of how well you can use your core for stability. And I'll just do it in a very bastardized way. But they have you come down into a push-up position, put your feet together, straighten your knees so they're off the floor. And they have you try to do a push-up from the bottom without doing the worm to come up. So creating lots of stiffness in the trunk. So just if you feel like you want to, how well can you do that? Come off the floor in one piece without doing the worm. And I'm not saying that by the end of today that you'll be able to do that, but it's a fun check-in to see how well you can control that. Now, we're going to progress that 360 breathing pattern that we did into a situation in which we're creating intra-abdominal pressure. So come back onto your back. How are we going to create intra-abdominal pressure? We know we need that 360 breathing pattern so that we're not just pushing our guts forwards, stretching the abdominals. We also know that we need to bring the rib cage down at the front and not be hyperextended through your spine. So we're going to use the exhalation first to close the front of the rib cage. So if you want to just find these two sticky outy parts at the front of your ribs where there's a space between them, what we're going to be doing is using an exhalation to close that down, bringing the front of your rib cage down to meet your pelvis. And then you're going to try to hold that position. So full exhalation, all the air out until there's nothing left in your lungs, and your rib cage should be down all the way. And I want you to feel like the back of your rib cage is stuck onto the floor. Don't tuck under your pelvis, just keep your lower back in a slight arch. We need a slight arch in your lower back. Rib cage down all the way. Slight arch in your lower back. No space under the back of your rib cage. Little space under your lower back. Hold that spot. And you're going to try to hold this position and do your 360 breathing. When you breathe in, don't let your rib cage pop open. Don't let your abdominals overstretch forward. Try to breathe predominantly into the sides and back, lower abdomen, filling out that 360 quadrant. And every time you exhale, reinforce that rib cage down position. And just practice this for 1 minute. So you'll hear the cue ribs down quite a bit in core training. And it's not a bad one, but it's not the place necessarily to start if there hasn't been an understanding of we need the spine to be able to articulate fully, not just in that sagittal plane arching and rounding, but in all three planes, in rotation, in side bending. We need an understanding of what it means to breathe with a good diaphragmatic pattern. Then we can start to add in that ribs down cue. Make sure that when you do ribs down here, you're not rolling your shoulders forwards and not tucking your pelvis. One of the biggest things that I see with many of my clients when I'm going through these foundations is they tuck their pelvis, but leave their ribs up, and they can't seem to switch that coordination. So if that's you, just check in. Are you tucking your pelvis, but leaving your ribs popped open? Close down the rib cage. That's going to put your diaphragm in a better position to do that downwards smooshing on your organs, creating higher pressure. And then keep breathing. And what you should start to feel is it's a gentle abdominal contraction. You might start shaking a little bit if you've never done this before. And now if you're feeling confident with this, try to hang on to it. And we're going to increase the challenge, increase the demand for stability by bringing legs up in the air. So take one leg without changing your position of your rib cage, bring it up to 90 degrees, like so. If you'd like to monitor your position, put your hands on the front of your rib cage. Just make sure you're not popping them open. Make sure that the back of your rib cage isn't coming off the floor. Now take a 360 breath in and out here. Can you still do it? Or does it just pop open your ribs? Or do you just push your abdomen forwards? Put that foot down. Maintain this compressed abdominal position. Bring your other leg up. And then take a breath in and out. Make sure you're not clenching your jaw. In part one, I went through a little bit more about some other components involving the jaw and the tongue position. Not going to say too much about that here. Now, if you want the next level of challenge, which I'm already shaking a little bit, take your other leg up to 90 degrees, to our 90-90 position off the floor with the legs. And the weight of the legs now are going to be pulling your rib cage out of this position a little bit, challenging your ability to create that compression in your abdominal cavity. So you're going to have to work a bit harder now. Now you'll probably start to feel some abs working. Take a few breaths. Can you maintain this positioning while breathing into the quadrants that are challenging for you without just breathing, popping forwards your rib cage, without just pushing your belly forwards, without shrugging up your shoulders as you breathe? Take a few more breaths here. Every time you exhale, reinforce that ribs down position. You can make this very challenging for yourself just with the intention of holding strictly in this position. And let's take a little break here. All right, come on out of that. So that's one of the most basic positions to do that practice of creating abdominal pressure. Very simple, not a lot of complexity in that environment. The idea is to carry that forwards into other more complex activities. Some of the examples I gave earlier, like pushing your car up a hill or doing a deadlift, a lot more is going on. So we're going to go into one more exercise that involves movement of the limbs. I think I wrote in an email, if you have a water bottle, we can use this. That'll be nice and handy for you. So grab something rolly, like a water bottle or a foam roller or a peanut butter jar or something. And we're going to do a quadruped rock back, which is going to involve some movement of the hips. So it's not a lot of work. but I want you to have the feeling of creating that pressure in your abdomen while we do this rocking back motion while keeping your spine straight. But remember, to be able to find where your spine is straight, we need to find those two ends of the spectrum that we practiced earlier. So take a moment just to go through this whole extension of your spine. Find what is this full range of motion when you arch your back. What are the spots in your back that maybe need a little bit more mobilization? And then round your back all the way. And we want to find a spot halfway in between. There is no such thing of knowing where neutral spine is unless you have explored both extremes, which is part of that whole finding center journey that us anatomy and motion geeks are after. Now, you should have a flat shelf of a pelvis. And if you can, it's kind of awkward on your own, try to put your rolly object on that flat part of your pelvis. If you're tucked under, you will drop it. And we don't want a tucked under pelvis to create intra-abdominal pressure. We need that slight lordosis. Tucking under reduces the degree of pressure you can create. So in this position, you're going to keep your back straight. Try not to pop your rib cage open. Take a breath in and out. Not too much work probably. And now I want you to rock back with your butt towards your heels without dropping that roller or bottle or whatever. When you've gone as far as you can, it's like you're in a squat on the floor. I want you to take a breath in and out. Can you do those 360 quadrants? You might find that with a little bit of extra compression in your abs here, you can actually feel the pressure. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. You can feel the pressure when you breathe in. So this is kind of emulating if you're in the bottom of a deep squat. Take a breath in and out when you get to your full rock back. Try not to round your back. Also try not to thrust your ribs towards the floor. Breathe in and out, and you'll especially feel the pressure build in the lower abdomen here if you take your breath into that lower abdomen quadrant. So we're just checking, can you keep your spine still so you're not thrusting your rib cage forwards or tucking under? And can you breathe into those all quadrants of the abdomen, sides, back, and front, even your upper chest? Do one or two more. You might even feel a little bit of work in your hips. You might feel a bit of work in your abs. Try not to let your face droop towards the floor. Your head is attached to your spine, so try to keep that in one line. And take a little break. Ooh, I hope you can still see me okay. That light is just shining in like crazy. Now, we talked about what happens when there's an increased demand for mobility. How can you still keep some degree of protection or stability for your spine? And this is where I got really interested when I had a yoga practice because I had a bad back. So I ended up modifying every back bend to be very small and also being able to limit the size of it to where I could still do a 360 breath. So there was a point at which if I back bended too far, I lost the ability to breathe into all of those quadrants. So I restricted my yoga practice to only do ranges of motion in which I could breathe in. And I found that very beneficial just for an awareness perspective and also for making my back not hate me perspective. So what we're gonna do, if you feel okay to do some sun salutations, we're gonna go through a modified sun salutation. And in each of the positions, we're gonna pause and just check in. Can you do that 360 breathing? How much intra-abdominal pressure does it feel like you can create by limiting how much you're doing this kind of thing but knowing that it's going to be a lot less depending on the position that you're in. So I'll just do a quick kind of overview of the sun salutation, and then we can do it all together. Whoever is still with me, I think some people have left to go do things with their lives. So this is modified, so we're not going to do like a chaturanga thing because not everyone can do that safely. So we're first going to go into the back bend, holding there for breath in and out, a forwards bend, holding there for a breath in and out. You're going to step back into this lunge, hold here for a breath in and out, step into a plank, you know the deal, breath in and out, push back to a downward dog, breath in and out, step forwards with the other foot, breath in and out, forwards bend, breath in and out, and then up into a backwards bend, breath in and out, and then back up again. And we're only going to do like 1 or 2 rounds, but I want you to really be mindful of sternum belly expansion, lower abdomen expansion, sides of the rib cage expansion, back of the rib cage expansion. What's going on with you, and how does that change if you limit your range of motion to only where you can breathe well with some degree of intra-abdominal pressure and abdominals holding like cellophane. But cellophane has some stretch to it, so you can still move. All right, so be mindful of if you're pushing past your threshold, stop when you need to, or just watch me like I'm entertainment. That's cool too. So do your back bend here. Hold for breath in and out. Full exhalation. Forwards bend. Breath in and out. Step back with your right foot. Lunge. Can you still breathe in and out? Plank. Remember this from earlier. Can you breathe in and out? Push back, downward dog, tailbone to the ceiling, heels to the floor. How is that? Expansion. Step forwards with your left foot. Lunge. Breath in and out here. Step forwards with your right foot, forwards bend. If you have your own version of sun salutation, feel free, do that. Reach forwards and back bend, hold breath in and out. Be very careful with this one. It is the one where it's the hardest. And let's just do that again on the other side. Back bend, breath in and out. Do you still have that connection to the 360 breathing? Breath in and out in the forward bend. Step back with the left foot into a lunge. Now, I'm not giving too much cueing on this because I'm not a yoga teacher. This is just an example. Step back into a plank. Can you do your 360 breath? This is where you have the highest capacity for stability in this straight position. Downward dog. Don't poke your rib cage forward. Don't tuck under. Breathe in and out. Step forwards with your right foot. Step forwards with your left foot, forwards bend. Breath in and out. This is also relatively easy to do that 360 expansion, for me anyway. And into the back bend, hold one breath in and out. This one will be the hardest to do the back of the rib cage expansion. And in the back bend, it's really easy just to kind of let yourself open up and lose connection to the front of the body, the abdominals that hold the ribs down. Nor should you be able to hold your ribs down doing that, but we want to have a bit of awareness of that. Okay, so if that was useful as an example, any exercise you can use as an example or as an experience for getting awareness of that ability to generate intra-abdominal pressure integrated with whole body movement, sometimes more stability, sometimes more mobility. Now let's check in again with some of the stuff we did at the beginning and we'll wrap this thing up. So stand with your feet side by side. Where is the pressure in your feet right now? Is it different than in the beginning? Are you a bit more centered or are you less centered now? Do you feel like you're moving around, swaying back and forth less? Make a little note of that. We just did it, but we'll do it again anyway. Check in with the ease of your forward bend. Now, this might feel easier if we just did some sun salutations, but it might also feel easier by virtue of moving our spines in that very first exercise on the floor, or sometimes just breathing has a freeing effect on the whole body. Now go into your back bend. You just did this, I know. Does it feel like more of your spine is moving? Does it feel like your range is easier? Is there still any discomfort in your back if there was before? And I'd like you to try your plank again, just to see if that feels any different. We did this in part 1 as well, to see if it felt easier to breathe in your plank position. Do you feel like you're a bit more able to access this plank position? Do you feel less shaky? Do you feel more shaky? And then just for fun, zero expectation this will be better for anybody if you tried it before, but try that trunk stability push-up test from the FMS, although they have you do it with your hands over your head, which is like freakishly hard for little old me. But can you lift off the floor more easily? Think about creating some pressure in your abdomen. Oh, that was hard. Can you come off the floor in one piece? Again, that one probably doesn't get better just in one session. But if the limitation was you just didn't know how to connect to your abs, but you actually are strong enough, then I don't know, maybe that did improve. But anyway, I'd like to wrap up. And those of you who are still here live, if you have any questions, just have a think about that if you'd like to, or if you had any observations. But I'd also like to invite you to observe how we didn't really talk about specific muscles today. We never really talked about your rectus abdominis or your obliques. But what I want you to appreciate is by virtue of doing the movements that we just did, every single muscle must have worked, must have done something. And we don't really necessarily need to get overly, unless you're a nerd like me, you don't need to get into the details of knowing, yes, I am engaging my rectus abdominis. We kind of just need to get our body into the right joint positions and movements. And then the muscles really have no option but to do the thing that they're set up to do. And it's a bit more of a efficient way of working the body than micromanaging each individual muscle. Like, come on, left internal oblique, fire. I don't know about you, but I can't do that. But I can put myself into a position that gives those muscles no option but to do their thing. On that note, if there are any questions, who is left here? A couple folks, amazing. Let's see, somebody typed a thing in there. You can also feel free to unmute yourself and just speak. Yeah, they make you put your hands up here. Tim, yeah, I don't know, have you done the FMS? But yeah, it's hard. Bonnie, I still struggle to make the bucket handles and rib cage go down, and the 360 breathing, the compression thing. I don't know if that's a question, but I feel your struggle. I feel your struggle. Sometimes it takes practice, and sometimes if there is a a history of having had some injuries, it also makes it harder. I was working, I am working right now with a 15-year-old guy we just started working together and we're trying to coach him into doing some core stuff, the foundations of it. And he's into it, which is cool. And he's gotten a grasp on it. It's been our third session and he's got it on his third session. It was a bit of a challenge, but he has a grasp on this. It took me like 3 years. And I had a history of injuries. So I was fighting against a lot of restriction and I was fighting against a lot of difficulty breathing in a calm way, let's say. So there was a little bit of some emotional stuff getting in the way of actually breathing in a relaxed way, which is one of the foundations. So yes, there are many factors, and I can't say exactly what your struggle is, Bonnie, without seeing in real life, but I'm sure that if you keep chipping away at it, you will get somewhere. Thanks for that. Let's see, anything else? Question, bucket handles up, but ribs down. Okay, yes, I understand. I understand your question now. And this is also a point that a lot of people have a bit of confusion about. So think about it's the difference between, let's say you have I'm just thinking about like an accordion or something. And the accordion, you can expand like that. And the accordion's sitting on a table and it's expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting. But you don't want the accordion in this example to actually like tip to one side. And that tipping would be the tipping of the rib cage. So you want to be able to have the rib cage relatively in one spot, not tipped either direction. And just like the accordion, kind of expand. So it's the difference between what's the actual position of the thing on the ground and the ability for all of the joints of the rib cage themselves, all the individual ribs, to get space between them and expand. Does that kind of make sense, Bonnie? It's a tricky concept sometimes. If it's not naturally happening in your body, it's really hard sometimes to actually get it to happen.
Yeah, I think it helps. Yeah.
Okay. You're like, I think it helps. That means there's probably still some stuff to clarify there from my perspective, but yeah, keep working on it. Okay, well, I think on that note, we will wrap up there. So thanks guys for coming out. Before you go, I want to let you know that for coming out live, you will be entered into a draw to win a prize, which is this month my colleague Holly Middleton, who is an anatomy and motion practitioner, and she is in Vancouver, and she has offered up a free 1-hour movement assessment. So if you're here, I'm just writing down your name. I'm going to put you into a draw. And Holly is awesome. She's a salsa dancer and biologist, so she's got a cool background, and very grateful to her for offering up that. If you'd like to go a little bit deeper into understanding why your body is doing the things it's doing, she is doing some Zoom consultations and things. So I'll be putting your names in a draw and I'll let you know tomorrow if you won a thing. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for coming out. Hope that was useful. Yeah, that's it. If you have any questions afterwards, just shoot me an email anytime. Cool. Have a great day, guys. Nice to see you, Owen.